So, as was said, I started Cigar City Brewing really trying to fill a hole that I noticed in the market. I was fortunate enough in my younger days to get to travel a little bit, and one thing I noticed as I went around the country is most breweries the size of Tampa, most cities the size of Tampa had a brewery, and we really didn't have one here in Tampa that I felt was closely associated with the city, and that was packaging and sort of kind of spreading the word of Tampa through beer. And it was something that I saw in other cities that, quite frankly, I was jealous of. And so I kind of had that kernel, that seed of an idea to do it, but I didn't think of myself as the person to do it. I educated myself on beer. I became very familiar with the process of how it was made and how it was sold, how it got to market. But I was doing all that sort of in preparation of going to work for someone else. I still had that kind of mentality at the time. And I kept waiting for someone to do that, and they didn't do it, they didn't do it, they didn't do it. And I started asking the question, well, why? Is the equipment too expensive? Is the skill set and the training, is it too hard to acquire? And in answering those questions to my satisfaction, I kind of built a business plan out of that. I became very convinced that not only could it be done, that it would be profitable, and that it would be sustainable, but it's always scary when you do the math and you look around and you're the only one coming up with that answer. But I became convinced that I could do it, and I scraped up some money. I got my dad to pitch in with me, and we moved into a space. And in the beginning, it really was just me. This is kind of going back to that precursor. I turned 21 in the early 90s, and I was able to go to Portland, Oregon, and that's where I first realized that, there's American-grown hops, there's American-grown barley, and it's being made in American breweries. And one thing I've learned is once you know something exists, you'll chase it, especially if you're passionate about it. Like I said, I turned 21. Might have had a few beers maybe prior to 21. And I didn't really like what I had access to. I tend to like hoppier beers and maltier beers, and the space was very much dominated by 2 or 3 large companies that made one style of beer, and I wasn't happy with that style of beer. There's nothing wrong with it. Pale lagers are great beers. I just didn't personally like them. So I knew that it existed. I knew it could be done, and it was. I do owe a thanks to the city of Portland for letting me try some of these beers pretty early on, and realizing that it could be done. So move forward to 2007. I incorporated October of 2007. My first 2 children, twins, were born in November of 2007. So I had a lot of activity going on in that year. These are shots of the original build out of the brewery. That's actually the original location that we started in. It was a very nondescript warehouse, not a lot going on there, very hands-on. As you can see, I'm down in a hole that we were digging out to pour our concrete floors. Floors do a lot of work in breweries, and so they're really important. And it's a really good analogy for anything. You have to have a very good foundation. Floors probably do more work than people in breweries, and so we put a lot of work into our floors. Through 2007 and 2008 was all outgoing. All the money was going out, none of the money was coming in. That's also a pretty scary situation. Come 2008, actually just at the very end, December of 2008, we got our first brew. That's my brewmaster, Wayne Wombles. This is another good lesson. I was a home brewer, and I knew how to brew. I knew how to create recipes. But what I knew I didn't know how to do was run a production brewery. It's the difference kind of between being a good cook at home and being able to whip up a nice meal for some people, and then doing it for, let's say, 1,000 people at a banquet. It takes a different skill set, and I knew that I didn't have it. So I reached out to a brewer that had been in the industry for 10 years, that shared my vision. When I pitched recipe ideas to him, unlike the dozens of other people I interviewed, he didn't look at me like I had 2 heads. So Wayne came on board, and he really helped. It was really just me and Wayne. So in the introduction, it was mentioned we had 2 employees. Some of that information is actually a little out of date. We actually have over 75 employees and 150 employees between all of our locations today. Not the 50 that was mentioned, but it was just Wayne and I in the beginning. And it's a lot easier to be a leader in that setting, because you can you can have a team meeting face to face. It definitely gets more challenging as you grow. But we brewed our first beer in 2008. Unfortunately, we didn't sell it until 2009 because the city of Tampa turned off our power because we had the unmitigated audacity to install our electric plans exactly as they approved them. And they came back to tell us, well, they shouldn't have approved them. So they let us just sit in limbo for a couple of months, came back and said, don't worry about it. Turned our power back on. Still didn't get a good satisfactory answer of why. Through 2008, 2009, we grew pretty rapidly, and we realized pretty quick we were, to use a quote from Jaws, going to need a bigger boat. So we got a really good deal on a 30-barrel brew house. We started on a 15. So in brewing terms, we speak in barrels. A barrel is 31 gallons, and if you ever see the big half-barrel kegs, they're called half barrels because they're 15.5. 2 of them is a barrel. So we got a really good deal. I'm very debt adverse right now. Our total debt is less than 2% of our enterprise value, and I keep it. It's my goal to make sure it never goes over 5%. I just don't like debt. I feel like it's an asset on income, and you get some opportunity misses if you're not willing to borrow a bunch of money. But I sleep better at night. So I kind of got this. I call this my China special. It was at a trade show, and they didn't want to send it back. So I actually bought it, and I paid less for this 30 than I did for my original brew house. And it's still the brew house that we're brewing on today. Very early on, we started bottling our beer, and if you know anything about economies of scale, cans tend to be cheaper, and study after study has shown they're better for beer. They protect from light. There's less oxygen ingress, but I couldn't afford to can when we started because you have to order a semi of each brand, and I couldn't afford to buy a semi truck full of cans, and I wasn't even sure there was enough demand to do it. So we started bottling. And as soon as I was able to, I wanted to make a hard switch to cans, but that was a tough business decision because cans still do have a reputation for being kind of lower brow, D Class A, and I knew that they were better for the brand, and so I went ahead and made the hard decision. A lot of people said, well, you're going to lose placements, finer dining establishments won't carry you. But I knew it was better for the brand, and I knew I wasn't keeping up with demand anyway, so I figured, okay, well, I'll just have more beer for the people that do stay with me. But fortunately, we went to see the people at Burns, and they're considered fine dining, and they totally got it. And I think it was their wine background of understanding that, look, what's best for the product is best for the product. And so we were able to take that story out into the market. And if you go to another steakhouse and they say they're not going to carry you because you're in cans and it's not classy enough, and you can say, well, Burns does it, it kind of ends the argument. So the few places that we got kicked out of, we were able to get back into pretty quickly. But that was a hard switch for us, and that was a tough business decision, but it was to me an example of, you know it's right, do it. Another way that we've kind of grown our awareness is events. We do a lot of experimental beers that are far, far, far outside of the mainstream, and some of them have really resonated with our consumers. And one of them is called Hunapu, and it comes from, in Mayan myth, there are the hero twins, Ziblanque and Hunapu. And the reason we call it Hunapu is because it's a big imperial stout. If you're not familiar with that style of beer, they tend to be 10% alcohol plus, super viscous, fairly heady beers. I mean, they're getting into wine strength. Huge mouthfeel. They're almost like a meal in a glass. Not everyone's idea of a thirst-quenching beer. And what we did, we thought it was a really good template to build a sort of a Mexican mole-inspired beer. So we take this imperial stout, we add vanilla, cinnamon, cacao, and a variety of chili peppers, actually what they call the Holy Trinity in Mexican cooking. And we build it all on this big imperial stout, and it really resonated. In 2009, we did a small release at the brewery, and we were flabbergasted to see like 300 people show up to buy this beer. Fast forward to 2014, 2015, we had 9,000 people show up to buy this beer. And we were not prepared for the influx of people, so we ran out of product. And it was a challenge, and it was one of the things where it almost got to be more work than it was worth, and we decided that we were going to stop doing the day, but we actually had a lot of people say to us, look, we're not happy with the way that it turned out. We came to get the beer wasn't there, but we would more regret that you didn't do it. But that was a big lesson for us, that sometimes you can become a victim of your own success. And we were utterly unprepared for just how big the reach of this beer became. We have people coming from Denmark, from Sweden, from Norway, flying into Tampa to buy a beer. And quite frankly, being a little bit more of an old soul beer drinker, I'm not going to wait in line for a beer. But it was, I think in some degree, it was me not really knowing how the market had changed a little bit. And so it was a lesson that we learned, and we had to move on from. Another thing that we got to do that I think was really a testament to what we'd been able to accomplish in a relatively short time. There's a brewery called Sierra Nevada, and this really speaks to the cooperative competition that you see. I like that term, co-competition. It's something that's really ingrained in the DNA of craft brewing, is that we get together with our competition and we share best practices and we brew together. And it was something we did quite a lot of in the early days because we didn't have a lot of other breweries in the area, and it was almost educational for us. We'd go brew at other breweries, sometimes smaller, sometimes bigger. I have personally never walked into a brewery where I didn't walk out learning something. And it's still really part of my education. I go to a lot of breweries because I want to see what people are up to, how they're innovating, or how they're rediscovering old things that have kind of dropped by the wayside. But Beer Camp Across America was put on by Sierra Nevada Brewing, and Sierra Nevada is one of the grandfathers of the craft brewing industry, and they were building their second location in North Carolina. They started in Chico, California, and we got invited to take part of this, and there was some of the luminaries of craft brewing. There was New Glarus out of Wisconsin, Three Floyds out of Indiana, just really some of the companies that I look up to the most, Bell's, that I think make some of the best products. And little us, that was the youngest brewery in the mix, got invited. And we were able to take part in this cross-country journey, going to different breweries and brewing these amazing beers with these amazing people. It to me was an experience that I literally could never have again. It was kind of a once in a lifetime thing, and I got to stand in a room amongst my peers and be counted among them. And it's just something that I was a culmination of all the hard work we've done, and just quite honestly so damn excited to be part of it. Some of the new locations mentioned, we opened a brew pub in Northdale, and that really grew out of, again, me not having as much money to start what I wanted to start in the beginning. If I'd have had the money, I would have started a food component to Cigar City Brewing right from the beginning, but as anyone in the restaurant industry can tell you, it's extremely expensive and extremely risky, and we just didn't have the money. We decided we would focus on the brewing side of things, but as a fifth generation Floridian and a native Tampan, and just a Tampa kid at heart, another thing I've noticed as I've traveled is Tampa has a really unique culinary history that doesn't really, the story of that culinary history doesn't get told. You have Cuban food in Miami, but that tends to be a newer influence. The Cuban population in Tampa goes back to the late 1800s. And so it's evolved sort of separately from some of the other Cuban influences. And I really wanted to highlight that with beer that was made and inspired by Tampa. So that's really where that grew out of, was trying to feature the unique Tampa-style Cuban food that has a lot of Sicilian influence to it. And it was really a labor of love, and it's been 2 years now. And it's going strong up in Northdale, which I know most of the people in this room don't like going north of Kennedy. So few people get out that way that don't live out that way. We also were very fortunate to be able to partner with HMS Host pretty early in our existence to build a brew pub out in the airport. And we handle the beer side of things, they handle the food side of things, but it put a lot of eyes on a very young brand at a very young time in our growth arc. And from a purely marketing standpoint, it really paid dividends for us. And that's a shot of me doing beer dinners. I've probably done 10,000 beer dinners at this point. And that really grew out of the wine culture. We in the beer industry said, hey guys, our product can stand up to food just as well, sometimes better. And so one of the ways you show that is you go out and do it. And so that's a big part of my life is beer dinners, although I just did I retired from beer dinnering. I did one out at Hard Rock Cafe at the Council Oaks, and that's my last one. That's one of the good things about success is now I can train other people to do a lot of that. Cider and mead is something that again, just grew out of my love of fermentation. Cider and mead has always sort of been if you're not familiar with the term mead is fermented honey, and it's actually the oldest alcoholic beverage on the planet. It grew out of my love of fermentation. I just really love the process, I love the science behind it. And cider and mead's always been the redheaded stepchild of wine, and it's really been embraced more by craft brewing than it has by the wine industry. And just growing out of that, my interest in Zymurgy, which is the study of fermentation, I got into fermenting apple and mead and found some really interesting recipes, and kind of found that it had stagnated a little bit, unlike craft beer, and we thought we could have some fun with it. So that's been open for a little bit over a year in Ybor City. The cider we can, and you can get on draft, but the mead you can literally only get there. We haven't taken it outside. It's a relatively expensive product, relatively small batch. So if you want to try any of those, you literally have to go to the facility in Ybor City. As was mentioned, we've grown a few with our employees, and that is one thing too that not having a background in leadership and really having a small team in the beginning, I've had to invest a lot of effort into building systems and putting them in place to effectively communicate to the team. One thing that I found is we were really good at marketing us, but we weren't really good at marketing us back to our employees. And so we've had to put a lot of effort into that, because as you get bigger, there's many more moving parts, and sometimes your customers are a little better informed of what's going on than your people, and that's a bad thing. We've really had to go back to the drawing board and make sure that our employees are as on point as the CEO is, as the vice president is, that person in the tasting room knows what we're up to. We're off, we're doing these collaborations. My brewer might be brewing a beer in Norway, and then someone walks in and wants to talk about that. And that's one thing we've learned is part of what you're doing becomes the communication to the customer, and they want to interact with you. They want to talk about it. So every employee has to be able to speak to what's going on, and that's taken a lot of my effort lately. Not necessarily the thing that I love the most, but one thing you learn when you run a business is you have to do all the things that you can't afford to pay anyone else to do. So that's the end of it. Thank you so very much for letting me be here and tell my little story.